What's up, everybody? Welcome to Scientists That Destroy Evolution Theory. The Bible teaches that humans were created less than 7,000 years ago. This entire planet was destroyed by a global flood around 4,500 years ago, forming the entire fossil record and the modern mountain ranges. And that one day God will judge this planet again, globally, not by water, but by fire, when he sends his son, Jesus Christ, back to this planet to resurrect the dead. So, evolution theory teaches that we evolved from primitive animals, which evolved from a chemical soup, and that evolved from a dot that exploded from nothing long ago and far away. We're going to destroy that garbage theory and by looking at an article written by Dr. Nathanial Jeanson, has a PhD in developmental biology. He got that from Harvard University. And in this article, we will discuss whether or not homology proves evolution. Do similarities in the DNA and the structure of animals indicate that we evolved from a common ancestor? Or, as Nathanial Jeanson would claim, do they show that we were created by a common designer? Why do you share DNA with an ant? Why do mammals generally have 4 limbs? Why do different creatures' limbs often develop via similar genetic programs? Evolutionists attribute these biological similarities, this homology, to a common ancestor among diverse creatures. For example, evolutionists like Stephen Matheson reject common design by an omnipotent designer as an explanation for these facts. There's a competing explanation. Design is currently a failure, he says. We have no good reason to suppose that shared anatomical patterns and genetic programs could not have been otherwise, and in some cases we know that it can work in other ways to unseat common ancestry, or at least to rival it. Design theory has to show that life could have not been otherwise. So you have design or creation, which says that the similarities show a common designer, and then you have common ancestry, which says that we came from a single cell about 3 billion years ago, which evolved into all the diversity of life that we see today over the course of that deep time. Is the creationist explanation of design in trouble? Do we really have no good reason from a design perspective to expect similarities among the anatomical, developmental, and genetic patterns that we see? Let's apply what I call the parking lot test to Matheson's evolutionary claims. A quick trip to the nearest parking lot helps us unravel evolutionary logic and arrive at the true explanation for motor vehicle origins. Do cars share a similar anatomy? By far, most run on 4 wheels rather than 3 or 5. Is a developmental program or the construction process for each vehicle shared? Is the genetic program, the blueprint for a Honda Civic, fundamentally different from the blueprint for a Ford Focus? Profound similarities underlie vehicles whose origins are continents apart. So the places that make these cars are continents apart, yet they're using very similar tools, for their vehicles. So if you can exchange the lug nuts of a Pontiac with, like a Chevy, does that prove that they evolved from a skateboard millions of years ago? If you can show me similarities in Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint, does that prove that they evolved from Morse code long ago and far away? Are you freaking kidding me? This is the fuzzy logic that these so-called experts are using, but you have another expert right here from Harvard University, and he claims otherwise, among literally hundreds of other scientists that strongly disagree with this, but had their papers rejected and considered to be irrelevant in the scientific market each time they try to produce, an article on something like this to show how we were not evolved, but that we were created. There's an obvious bias in the literature because There's plenty of experts out there which strongly disagree that homology proves common ancestry. It's just not even rational to conclude that, anyways. It's master engineered. Okay, if you look at the previous episode, we talked about over engineering in nature. It's not just engineered to perform a specific function, it's over engineered so that if future injury or impairment happens, it can recompensate for that. But anyways, just go back to the previous episode if you want more on that. Let's continue with this article here. By evolutionary standards, these vehicles should have originated from a common ancestor millions of years ago. We have no good reason to suppose that all cars should share a similar chassis or overall structure pattern. We might search in vain for the definitive scientific paper showing that four wheels are the optimum design for cars. We might never find the peer-reviewed papers which performed exhaustive tests of every possible car blueprint. Yet we know that all cars were designed by intelligent designers and were not the product of time and chance. Evolutionary logic fails the parking lot test. Okay, it's not logical that they didn't come from a common designer, that plants and animals today didn't come from a common designer. If you're going to suggest that they came from a common ancestor, that, they evolved, then, since biology is more complex than anything like that man has produced today, for instance, the most primitive cell that you can find is more complex than a space shuttle, which is the most complex thing man has ever devised. So biology is way more complex than man-made machines. Okay, the factories that happen in living organisms are mind-bogglingly complex. Okay, and to suggest that they just evolved into that would be like saying that all of the different cars evolved from primitive factories. I mean, it's the same logic, because if a car wouldn't assemble itself, I don't know why something biological would, when it's far more complex than a car. That's just not good logic. That's just irrational. So what does this discussion reveal? It reveals that some evolutionists are poor, very poor, at reasoning from a design perspective. Hence, if evolutionary logic and reasoning cannot correctly explain the origin of things whose intelligent design has been directly observed, like motor vehicles, why should we trust evolutionary logic when applied to those things whose origins have not been directly observed, like a dinosaur? Simple parking lot type tests expose even more weakness in evolutionary reasoning about the existence of shared features. For example, evolutionists cite so-called transitional forms in the fossil record as premier evidence of descent, with modification from a common starting point. Real transitional forms do not exist. We only see fossils that blend features of two fundamentally different categories of creature, like the Tiktaalik, which is a supposed transition between sea and land creatures. Evolutionists might again assert that we have no good reason to think that these creatures were designed. Yet a trip to a military base, or even to the Wisconsin Dells for a duck tour, reveals the error of this reasoning. Not only have intelligent military engineers designed both motorized land vehicles, like tanks and troop carriers, and sea vehicles, aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines. They've also created amphibious assault vehicles. These vehicles are transitional in their design, in that they blend the characteristics of fully functional land and sea vehicles. Hence, creatures that blend features of two fundamentally different categories of creatures are products of deliberate engineering. We may have no good reason to expect that homology is a product of intelligent design until we take a trip to parking lot. You see, you go to the parking lot go to the parking lot and you see insanely complex vehicles. Okay, you go to any place that produces different kinds of vehicles, like the military or the Navy, and they're producing these submarines, and they're producing these tanks, and they're producing these aircrafts. Okay, and they're insanely complex. Well, in biology, it's far more complex, many hundreds of times over the complexity of man-made devices. So you see similarities in different things. You go to the parking lot of some military base and you see a similarity in how the tanks are designed. You know that it comes from a common designer. So it's not good logic. Now you could go to the fossil record, like he was pointing out, and you could see very distinct differences in the animals. They have major categories of animals: fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, and in between, like the reptile and the mammal, there's creatures that exhibit features of both of those. So there's like in between. And is that, um, can you show that one evolved into the other because you can find an in between stage? Does that mean that it's in the process of evolving? Well, it wouldn't be good logic. It wouldn't be rational to make that conclusion, because of the fact that, you're not seeing a transition. You're seeing an animal that has both, qualities of the creature below it and qualities of the creature above it, but no obvious transition is occurring. You don't see a slow, gradual increase in complexity of the animals like in the fossil record. You just see distinctly different animals, and so that would actually indicate, ecosystem burial. So various ecosystems with different kinds of animals living on them. They were destroyed. Animals today, you have the primitive animals at the bottom of the ocean floor, and then complexity of the animals actually rises as you ascend above sea level. Your altitude above sea level, different ecosystems are more complex the higher on land that you get. So a bird is a lot more complex than a little primitive cell at the bottom of the ocean floor, far more complex. And even the most primitive cell is far more complex than anything that man has devised. So if you look at it correctly, you can see that the animals were designed, that they were destroyed by a global flood. Their homologous structures indicate that they have a master engineer that is using various tools, for different purposes. So thanks for tuning in. God bless America. My name is Christopher Sylvius. Peace be upon you. I'm out.